I'm Robert Rodgers, founder of Parkinsons Recovery in 2004. We're dedicated to provide information, support, and resources to individuals who currently confront neurological challenges. I always have my eye open and my research lens focused on natural remedies that enable individuals to celebrate a relief from their neurological challenges. I have recently been able to identify one natural option that is offering individuals welcome relief from whatever symptoms they currently experience. And I'm proud to announce that I've been able to recruit the international expert on an extract from a plant known as aloe. Dr. Reg MacDaniel has been a practicing medical doctor for many years, and he's here to talk about a little change that he has made in his life from becoming a person focused on prescription medicines to a person who's rather focused on food as medicine. Dr. Reg, thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on our program today.
Thank you.
So many people will be curious about this big shift that has occurred in your life. You were trained as a medical doctor, you practiced as a medical doctor for many years, and then all of a sudden there was a shift into your interest in food as medicine, or particularly an extract from the aloe vera plant. So what in the world happened in your life? Why the shift?
Well, first, I think you should know that the typical university student has a full load with 13 hours. However, I took 21 for 4 years, and I got a double major in chemistry and biology. And my favorite subject of all this time was embryology, which is just marvelous. But I had 2 years with hours in cellular physiology, which would be a graduate degree that I didn't finish. But a very important thing happened when I was an undergraduate student. For 2 years, I was an extern for Dow Chemical Company at Beasley Research Center in Freeport, Texas. The important thing about that is we took gases and liquids, and with pressure, heat, catalysts, and rare earth metals, we could make different kinds of plastics because these molecules would hook together, and depending on how your reaction was, you could make glasses or dishes or even batteries for trucks to line up down the side, or you could make thin film in the kitchen that you put over the top of things. And the importance of this is that every cell in our body is an ultra micro polymerization or hooking together of molecules, which are nutrient molecules in cellular synthesis under the control of genes. So this helped prepare my mind for what was going to happen in the future. Now, I went to medical school for 4 years, and I had to, my father was killed in World War II, and I had to work all the years through undergraduate to graduate school to medical school. And every job that I had eventually contributed to the ability to be able to help this company that came to me in 1985 from about 10 miles from Grand Prairie, Texas, in Irving, Texas. A little company called AvaCare had 12 aloe leaf gel products, one of which was called Carolo, which was an aloe beverage. The owner of the company came to me in a 3-piece suit and tie and very promotional and businesslike, wanting me to be a consultant to his company that he had had reports in 84, 85 from 7 acquired immunodeficiency syndrome individuals, which were called AIDS, that they had drunk his aloe beverage, Carolo, and they were on their deathbeds waiting to die from this new disease of unknown cause and no treatment. They said that on drinking this beverage, they were back at school or in work and had very few symptoms and thought he would want to know. Well, he came to me wanting to be a consultant, and I said, no, I'm not qualified. He had raised $20 million for a company that he called Carrington, and its job was to find out what was in aloe leaf gel, make a new drug of it, and everybody would get filthy rich, because at that time, 84, 85, the general population was on edge, afraid that this new disease would break out of homosexual males and drug addicts and prostitutes and spread into the general population. And so he projected that that we could make a drug of this. I told him he should go to a medical school and get an infectious disease specialist. He could pay him. And I found out years later that he had tried this and they wouldn't give him the time of day, because this was aloe leaf gel, and whatever it was sort of a natural product, and you cannot patent natural products. You have to at least modify them to be able to protect your intellectual property for the drug company. Well, to make a long story short, he hired a PhD, Dr. Bill McAnally, to be his chief science officer. He had a PhD in pharmacology and in toxicology, and he approved studies. And between the two of them started working on me to be a medical consultant. And I finally said that these 7 reports you got are all anecdotal. I was taught that anecdotal reports mean nothing, that they should do a pilot study here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with AIDS patients and see if they would respond like these anecdotal reports. Because I felt personally, I was so indoctrinated with the pharmaceutical drug paradigm and conventional medicine attitudes that I thought it was a placebo effect of desperately ill people, or either a hoax. And so I felt like I could do this pilot study. And so we chose 15 individuals that had this syndrome, and we froze their serum. And eventually we were able to show by Lisa tests and Western blot that yes, they did have the AIDS agent, and which was eventually found to be a retrovirus. And I really thought in doing this pilot program that the aloe would not do anything and I would be through, and I didn't have to worry about not being qualified. Well, lo and behold, those 15 patients improved 73% in 90 days using criteria in the New England Journal of Medicine by a paper by Dr. Robert Redfield, who was at the military hospital in Washington, D.C. at that time. And actually, I told Dr. Redfield about using his criteria in this study as he was trying to get in a taxi. And he said, I'd like to know more, but I don't want to miss my plane. But says, I only did this to try to predict how long these patients would live before they would die. And I said, well, we turned them around. He said, well, that's interesting. And we never met again. Well, to make a long story short, the active ingredient from the aloe leaf gel, which was the Carolo, a graduate student from Nigeria, Dr. Alexis Eberendu from the University of North Texas, got his doctorate, and he was delivered in a rainstorm in Dallas to a wrong address, and FedEx picked him up against company rules, standing there in the rain with an umbrella, and brought him to their next stop to find a telephone, but to try to get a taxi to take him to the right address. Well, the next stop was the company laboratory for Carrington Laboratories. And it was coming the end of the day, and everybody was leaving, and Dr. McAnally, the chief, was the only one left. And so they called for a taxi, but they were in the Trinity Industrial District, and he said, it'll be an hour before a taxi gets here. And so they started talking, and he said, what did you get your doctoral thesis in? He said, in separation of carbohydrate molecules. And Dr. McAnally hired him on the spot, because at that point we were at a stopping point and could not proceed with the FDA, because they wanted to know what was in the solids that we were getting out of the aloe gel, and we couldn't determine what it was. We just knew it was heat stable, and if it was a complex protein or organic molecule in a microwave oven, it would destroy the activity. Well, they had been able to find in tissue cultures and in wound healing that the active ingredient was not destroyed by heat. And so it was just theorized maybe it could be carbohydrate. Well, at that time, science and medicine just believed that carbohydrates were just sources of carbon and decarbon atoms that are hooked up together in photosynthesis, and some energy from the sun is in that bond, and that in every cell there is an organ called a mitochondria that breaks that bond and transfers energy to adenine, when it makes adenine triphosphate and diphosphate, which are the molecules for energy that operates our cells. Even our muscle contractions are done with ATP. Well, Dr. McAnally hired him on the spot. He was probably the only person in the world that had this knowledge that's very esoteric. As I told you, medicine and science had decided it was just carbohydrates were just a source of energy, and there were very few papers even written about analysis of carbohydrates. And so he had a very special talent, so special that I saw a FDA lab tech with a emblem of the FDA on that was sent down for a week to learn from Dr. Eberendu how to assay for these carbohydrate units called saccharides. And Dr. Eberendu found out that the active ingredient in the aloe leaf gel was acetylated mannose, that we call for short Acemannan. Well, this was antiviral, and actually a research virologist from the University of Alabama Southern Research Institute named Jasbir Cologne, PhD, was able to show that the mechanism of action of why this was antiviral, and I won't go into the details of that, but it's fascinating. It's probably the most sophisticated mechanism of action. And we found out that any virus, animal viruses I'd never heard of, pathogenic viruses in humans and even plants, that this Acemannan blocked the synthesis of the viral protein in the cells. And so this is the mechanism of action we ultimately found. But in these AIDS patients, we followed them after the first 90 days we're talking about. In about 2.5 years, I think I made the most significant contribution to this research. I asked a very simple question. And it was based on observations that when the immune system was wiped out by the AIDS virus, these AIDS patients developed all types of chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, hypertension, other chronic diseases. However, when this Acemannan molecule rebuilt their immune systems, these diseases faded away. And I asked the question, I wonder if someone did not have AIDS and they had one of these chronic diseases and you gave them this Acemannan, would they get a benefit? Well, the answer was not only yes, but yes and yes over and over again. And this is the reason that, as I say, there was no hypothesis in this. It just, we stumbled through it over and over again. And I'll have to tell you, I was so indoctrinated with the pharmaceutical paradigm and attitude of conventional medicine, I didn't believe what I was seeing and hearing for the first 2 years of these 41 years. But the responses of patients over and over again when this was added to their diet, it didn't matter whether it was emotional or brain function or heart function or bone marrow function or kidney function or metabolic diseases, they all improved when this was added to their diet. And we had, I told you that Dr. Eberendu showed that it was acetylated mannose. Well, actually in science, you've got to have sometimes 2 and 3 or more different laboratories repeat what you're doing before anybody will accept it. Well, we found a paper in the middle of the night in the medical school library, a review paper, Annual Reviews of Biochemistry 1985, authored by 2 biochemists by the name of Kornfeld, and they had about 300 references over about a 30-year period of different types of experiments, that they wrote a review paper that basically was over my head. And it's a long story of how I finally, I'd say after I've been over this paper 30 times, I realized that it validated our finding that acetylated mannose was important, because in that paper, they point out that the cell requires about 1,000 magnification by the light microscope and staining to even see. That's what pap smears are based on, because malignant cells look a lot different than normal cells under the microscope. However, when you look at a cell under the microscope, it looks like there's an empty space in the cytoplasm. And with electron microscopy and special procedures and electron microscope at 100,000 magnification, you find out there's an assembly line in every cell that, under the control of the genes, nutrient molecules are hooked together to make compounds that run the biochemistry of life. And eventually, these AIDS patients, we had some of them that they lost memory and cognition. We had those that had leukemia, lymphoma, and Kappa-Shea sarcoma, malignancy of blood cells, the capillaries. There were 3 different cell lines of malignancy that went away when you had this Aloe Acemannan. So therefore, this ran into other experiments, and it will soon be on the web, a book called Beyond All Reason that tells the story of how we slowly developed the knowledge base from these AIDS patients that the acetylated mannose was anti-cancer. And we have at the end of this book a manuscript published in China and also one published in Saudi Arabia, that it's the same mechanism of action, that the Acemannan induces the mitochondria to excrete or produce caspase, C-A-S-P-A-S-E. This is an enzyme that destroys protein structure in cells. Well, the remarkable thing about this is that this is 2 poles on the planet coming up with the same mechanism. The one in China was on human colon cancer cells, and the one in Saudi Arabia was on breast cancer cells, and that this caspase destroys the protein structure of malignant cells but does nothing to normal cells. This is historic because for decades, cancer research has wanted to find something that would be anti-cancer and not affect normal cells. Well, they failed over and over again. And this active ingredient from the aloe is anti-cancer against cancer cells, but does nothing to normal cells. And this is why in this book you find that I've written Beyond All Reason that this is anti-cancer. Also in this book, I wanted to go back to Southwestern University and tell my #1 professor how much he had meant to me over the years in graduate school and medical school and residency with interactions I had with him in this small university. And I found out he was no longer in the house that he had lived in. His wife had died, and they sent me to a retirement center, and he had been moved from there to a special center. And finally, I got him on the phone, and he wanted to know who I was, why I was calling him over and over again. And he was in a Alzheimer's unit. And you cannot imagine the crestfallen emotional shock that this revered professor didn't know who I was, and I couldn't communicate with him to tell him how much I appreciated he had done for me, carrying him in my mind and heart through difficult years of education. And so in this book, Beyond All Reason, I also point out that we eventually did a study in Miami because a lady, I had been begging for nickels and dimes to do research to try to find out why things worked time and time again, but could not get the money. And this lady came to my office with a check for $200,000. Her husband makes drilling rigs for exploration of gas and oil, and he had sold 4 of them, and he needed a tax write-off. So he gave her this check for $200,000 and says, give it to some organization that has an IRS exemption to accept contributions that can be written off. And she said, we've had 5 family members to die of Alzheimer's disease. We would like to spend some money for research in Alzheimer's. Well, you cannot imagine the feeling of responsibility to finally have in your hands $200,000, and you wanted to make sure it was not wasted, like so much research is done. So I went to my past medical school, University of Texas in Dallas, a Southwestern Medical School, and they were appalled at me wanting to do research on the active ingredient from aloe. They were only interested in pharmaceutical drugs, and they kicked me off the clinical faculty. And in fact, the dean at a reception told me I was the biggest embarrassment that the medical school had of all its graduates. And I was a disgrace to the medical center, having been through 2 residency programs at Parkland Memorial Hospital. And I said, well, what did I do to earn this distinction? He says, cavorting with osteopaths and chiropractors and oriental medicine doctors and others claiming to be physicians and touting natural substances. He says, you have them take it at midnight with a full moon or something, just as sarcastic as he could. And anyway, I was told no. So I went over to Fort Worth Medical School for osteopathic physicians, and I had taught pathology over there when they didn't have money for the faculty for 2 years, and I thought that I could, it was sort of a come down from the medical school that I had been to. However, when I got there, instead of a bunch of old buildings that they had purchased, the state had taken over the medical school and had these fine brick buildings, and I was put in a room with 6 PhD pharmacology professors, and I started giving my story about more comprehensive nutrition, that this molecule, acetylated mannose, that is present in aloe leaf gel, has incredible health restorative policies as if it's added to the diet and utilized in metabolism. And if you're having a little trouble with that, I step back from it and say, well, this is very much like the vitamin discovery era, and this would be an incredible vitamin if in fact this is a valid analogy, because it is utilized in cellular synthesis to make a domain present on the membrane of all cells and all organs. And this domain is for homeostasis. That's a word that probably the average person has never used and certainly doesn't know what it means, but it means balance and harmony metabolically in all the cells. And if the metabolites or the insulin or hormone is high, cells communicate with each other. That is not a theory, it's a fact, with small molecules in the serum that are called cytokines, cell kine being action, cell activators. And apparently they tell this domain we have too much or too little of either these metabolites or this end product, and the genes are either turned on or turned off to bring it to the normal level. Well, when you're in the homeostatic or normal zone of the cells, you do not have deviations from normal, which for human communications we call diseases and syndromes. And this domain that is made from the active ingredient from the aloe, this Acemannan, gets the cells into this normal zone. And that is the theory of why we have such an incredible spectrum of benefits when this is added to the diet with other nutrient molecules that are low, missing, or avoided by choice because we just don't like them. And a good example of that is the cruciferous vegetables that have a special amino acid that has a sulfur on it that gives it a bite, like turnips and broccoli and cauliflower and kale. They have this thing. So we can get this amino acid and put it into the dietary supplement, and it doesn't have a bite, yet you get the benefits in the metabolism of the cells and cellular synthesis under the control of the genes. So that's what we were seeing. And as I said, we even had AIDS patients that had problems with memory and cognition. And I was asked to be a medical director for a company called Manatech Incorporated, and they had multiple distributors that were baby boomer ages, and they found out by giving this to their parents that were losing their memory, and they would go to the grocery store and couldn't find their way home where they had lived for 20 or 30 years, and they gave them this active ingredient from aloe, and their memory and cognition came back. Well, again, these were anecdotal reports, but they built up to the point that eventually when this lady came in with this $200,000, we wanted to do a clinical study in patients that were losing their memory and cognition, and that's called dementia. And the most common one is Alzheimer's. So I had been turned down by the medical school in Dallas and the osteopathic school in Fort Worth. And lo and behold, I'm invited to come to Miami to present the research we had done on AIDS patients that had responded well, and I presented it. And the platform speaker for this new building they were dedicating and had a weekend of programs to celebrate this, said that the Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami wanted to be the premier medical school in the United States to evaluate Oriental medicine, Ayurvedic medicine from India, Kunandari medicine from Central and South America, and folk medicine from Africa, find out what works, why it works, and integrate it into modern healthcare management. I had found the place to bring my $200,000, and they gave me a professor, Dr. John Lewis, who was a vegetarian bodybuilder, that he had statues and awards to show that on a vegetarian diet, how you could have good muscle development and all. And of all things, his boss was a vegan who ran marathons to show that by performance on a vegetarian diet, you could perform marathons. So I was in good hands. We were turned down by 5 different health systems in the Miami area, starting with the Veterans Administration, that they would not give us the time of day. They were only interested in potential new drugs. And this was more comprehensive nutrition built around the active ingredient from the aloe leaf gel. Well, finally, due to his energy and persistence, Dr. John Lewis found the Miami Health Service that had the biggest retirement center for elderly people on the East Coast, and they had 150 in-house beds for Alzheimer's patients and an outpatient program. We made a presentation to them, and they were very cynical about more comprehensive nutrition rather than a drug. And as one of the staff members said, you really don't believe that improved nutrition will take these patients that have been mute for maybe many months. We have to bathe them, dress them, put food in their mouth, tell them to chew it and swallow it, that more comprehensive nutrition will help them. We said, well, we have pilot patients and series that suggest, yes, this is good to help them. Well, their attitude was, you got money, we got patience, we will take your money. And a good example of this was at 6 months, I was invited to come down and give them a lecture again about the benefits to AIDS patients. And the medical director for this Jewish health center invited us to come to his office and at a certain time, and it was during Passover celebrations for this Orthodox Jewish facility. If you think Christian hospitals kind of shut down for Easter and Christmas, you ain't seen nothing until you see an Orthodox Jewish facility shut down for Passover. And he said he would break his temple schedule for an hour if Dr. Lewis and I would come to his office. He was a totally different person. He says, we have done 6 patients. They were supposed to do about 30, and just doing 6 is a good index to how uninterested they were in our study. However, as I said, he's a different person. He had his hands on the edge of the table, sitting on the edge of his chair, and he says, we have evaluated 6 patients that have taken this more comprehensive nutrition built around the aloe plant for 6 months, and they all have improved memory and cognition. We sat there silently, not surprised. Remember, we had pilot patients that had seen that. He repeated it again. We've done 6 patients, and as I told you, they've improved memory and cognition. He says, we've been doing drug research for 20 years. We have never had any patients improve memory and cognition. What we were trying to do is find a drug that would slow the progression of dementia. And what in the world is going on? Well, we kind of sat there and we said, well, we have found repeatedly that improved nutrition improves all the functions of all the systems in the body. And he didn't seem that impressed with that. And he says, one of these 6 patients is a architect that we've had for 10 years when he was first brought in by his wife, and said he had been mute for 2 years. He was bedfast. We had to bathe and dress him. We had to put food in his mouth, tell him to chew it and swallow it. And it was just like care for a newborn baby. He said now he's up eating in the cafeteria, talking to everybody. He knows all his family members, and he remembers business deals from over 10 years ago. What in the world is going on? Again, we said everything works better with more comprehensive nutrition. Well, at that time, we didn't know it, but in other studies, including a study up in Canada, where fetal alcohol syndrome children with IQs of less than 50 had been making no progress in special education, and there were behavior problems having been taken away from their alcoholic mothers and placed in foster homes. And slowly they began to improve their behavior, and they began to make progress in their education. And so they repeated their IQs that had been less than 50, and they range from 80 to over 100. Well, I've written a syllabus about how we found out why this happened. But to make a long story short, adding to the diet this acetylated mannose or acemannan, the bone marrow produces millions of stem cells that migrate in the blood to any organ where aged cells or dead cells or poorly functioning cells can be replaced and differentiated. The stem cells are differentiate, and it becomes a new cell. And in the Alzheimer's patients that improve their memory and cognition, we took their serum before they started the study, and then at exit and froze it. Well, what we found out is when the assay became available for brain-derived trophic factor, which I have to tell you, these stem cells are influenced to be matured or differentiated into new neurons, which are the source of memory and cognition. And this is why this brain-derived trophic factor, even though it was diluted with the entire blood volume, was increased during the study. In the stem cells, the CD14 monocytes increased almost 400% that were migrating into the brain, and this was evident. So we got bonuses with just 30 patients, which is unheard of, because the more patients you have to have when you don't do very much to improve whatever you're doing, but it doesn't take very many patients when whatever you're doing is having a major impact. Well, we not only were able to show that there was no toxicity due to this aloe acemannan, but that we had a putative mechanism of action of why their memory and cognition improved. Well, this information, that's not the end of the story. We have cerebral palsy children and adults that when added to their diet, they're able to do things that experts said they would never be able to do due to hypoxic damage to neurons in their brain that are replaced by this same mechanism that we had in the Canadian children and in the AIDS, the AIDS patients originally, but also the Alzheimer patients. And we also had stroke patients have incredible restitution of lost functions. We have had, for example, Down syndrome children and fragile ex-boys that have a dementia that have a major improvements in their cognition and their ability to function in society and to learn and do tasks. And the list goes on and on of this mechanism that we found that, and I might add that I looked at all the data we had from the study down in Miami, and we, as I mentioned before, that in my undergraduate study, my favorite topic was embryology. And what is not generally known is there are different types of stem cells for different stages of the development of the embryo. And the CD14 monocytes are plural potential. Those stem cells can do anything. However, there are stem cells that are CD34s, stem cells that are 131s, and in the search for plant material that would be added to the formulation to make these stem cells, we found out that in Japan, under the Functional Food Act, they have systematically been going back through Oriental medicine practices of 1,000 and 2,000 years, and they found out that they would give lion's mane mushroom powder to individuals losing their memory and cognition. With modern studies, they were able to show that this lion's mane mushroom generates stem cells, CD45s, that in the embryo are involved with the development of the brain, the cells in the eye that are the retina, and the spinal cord. And these are all CD45s. And if you continue looking into the literature, you'll find out if there's any trauma or surgical activity in the brain or the spinal cord, that it's CD45 stem cells that do the repairs. So we have added or tweaked, so to speak, the formulation that we got for the benefits for Alzheimer's patients. And we had a 69% benefit for memory and cognition in these 30 AIDS patients. However, I wanted to increase that 69% with tweaking it to make these other stem cells. I do not have the $200,000 grant to repeat that study with the improved formulation. However, I've had 2 primary care physicians tell me that instead of improving memory and cognition in months, that in weeks, memory and cognition is improved. So it's not only working faster, but we suspect that the percentage of patients that increase memory and cognition is increased from 69%. And that study opened the door to being able to do a controlled study at the medical school that is extremely expensive. I have been given the estimate it would be $2 to $3 million to do it, but as I said, gee, that's just too much money. But they said, well, it depends on the number of controls you have, how many patients that get the intervention, how long you treat them, the amount of money it's going to cost to do this study. And we still have the problem that in 1994, the federal government passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which formally recognized dietary supplements and their regulation under the federal government that was put under the FDA. In the labeling section of this new legislation, it states that only an FDA-approved pharmaceutical drug can represent or claim to treat, cure, mitigate, or correct an abnormal health condition. That is not the truth. It is a tribute to the political power of pharmaceutical companies and the conventional medicine, which you can't get a drug approved by the government without a prescription from a physician. And I say they're partners in crime to exploit the public because they both have the attitude of the costs be down. And when called on the carpet at congressional or Senate hearings, their lobbyists point out, how do you, here with our drugs, we're saving the lives of mothers and fathers and innocent children. How do you put a price on being able to do this? And no one wants to put a price on saving these lives. So they continue with the attitude of the cost be damned. And that's why under the FDA, the United States has the highest healthcare costs of all the nations in the United Nations. And the last time the World Health Organization did a survey of quality of life and health status, we rated as number 35. And by now it may even be worse. But this is this study in the Alzheimer's patients is the highest level of evidence-based science. We've had the money to be able to do the research, and this is the same mechanism that we've had multiple Parkinson's disease individuals. Fact is, there was a gentleman in California that I had multiple communications with, and he says people see this trembling of the hands and difficulty in walking straight. He says inside the head, it's like static that to try to think is difficult, just like your hands trembling. And he had total benefit from all his Parkinson's symptoms, and he was bound and determined he was going to find somebody and in some way in California to do a clinical study to prove this. Well, he spent about a year trying to find someone willing to do this. And the truth of the matter is there's limited funds to do drug research, but virtually no funds to do more comprehensive nutrition research, which unfortunately I have found out over and over again, you cannot do any research unless you have research funds.
So I'd like to suggest that if you have been watching this spectacular presentation by Dr. Reg, and by the way, you happen to be an individual that has resources in a monetary sense, you can contribute to the research that Dr. Reg would like to be able to do. So I'll be happy to put you in touch with him. So we're here at the end of our ability to have this presentation. Dr. Reg, for people who have watched your wonderful description of what your discoveries have been over these last 40 plus years, what would you like people who have watched this presentation to remember 1 week from now?
I would like for them to, just like I was indoctrinated and couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing the first 2 years, so many people in the public, and the more education you give, you're surrounded by people you know and have confidence in that believe in the pharmaceutical paradigm and the medical paradigm. See your doctor and have a physical examination once or twice a year, whether you got any symptoms or not. And what I want them to know is that actually this is a falsehood that I call more comprehensive nutrition, which you are in control of, personal, preventive, and interventional health management. And it's lower priced, it's safe, and it's effective. And it's what you eat and the different varieties of different types of food that supply. And as I point out over and over again, we do not violate federal law that says you only prescription drug can improve a health condition. The cell requires 1,000 magnification and staining to even see it. And then it takes electron microscopy and special procedures to see the assembly line inside the cytoplasm, which is made up of the ribosome, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi. And that under the control of the genes, nutrient molecules are used in, there is no instruments that can show you molecules and atoms and ions that are being utilized on this assembly line to make compounds. So therefore, this is a microcosmos that a human being cannot enter into. Everything is happening by what is one of the things that I have to tell you that over these 41 years, I have come to the conclusion over and over again that I have seen the evidence that there is a creative, organizing, and designing intelligent power active in the universe to do all of this about what's going on in the cell. And the universe out there, it's far beyond what I can say, but there is no question that there's intelligent design to life in this microcosmos, and people must know that their quality of life and longevity is determined by the diet and not prescription drugs.
Dr. Reg, this has been a life-changing presentation for all listeners. Thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on my program today.
Thank you.